Welcome to Tabletop Aesthetics, where we do everything tabletop. Today's aesthetic is Magic the Gathering CEDH. I will be showcasing my games from Chaos 5, a CEDH tournament ran by Kaos Tournaments. First round is Teshu on Tymna Thrasios, Dinky on Sefris stacks, myself on Adeline Win-Conless stacks, and Scotty on Tymna Kraum Blue Farm. Teshu goes first. Shu draws for turn. He plays a Tundra and casts a Crow Mox, imprinting Yawgmoth's Will. He then casts Ledger Shredder and ends his turn. Dinky draws for turn and plays City of Ass. He casts Enlightened Tutor, taking one from City of Ass. He searches Mana Crypt, putting it on top, and passes the turn. Scotty draws for turn and plays an Ancient Tomb and casts Mox Diamond, triggering and discarding Badlands. He ends the turn. I draw and play a Plains. I cast Jewel Lotus. I activate JLo, sacking it to add triple white and cast Adeline. Ledger Shredder triggers, Shu connives, discarding Noble Hierarch and putting a +1/+1 counter on Ledger Shredder. Everyone passes priority on Adeline, and she resolves. I pass the turn. Shu plays a Mana Confluence. He casts Tymna, taking one from Mana Confluence. Shu moves to combat and attacks Scotty for 2. Main phase 2, Tymna triggers and he loses 1 and draws 1. He passes the turn. Dinky draws his Mana Crypt and casts it. He follows it up with an Eidolon of Rhetoric. Ledger Shredder triggers and Shu connives, draws and discarding Enlightened Tutor, putting a +1/+1 counter on Ledger Shredder. Dinky ends his turn. Scotty draws and plays an Underground Sea and passes the turn. I draw and play a Plains. I cast Thorn of Amethyst. I move to combat and attack Shu. Adeline triggers, creating a 1/1 white human creature token for each opponent tapped and attacking them. Shu blocks a token with Tymna, gaining 2 life and taking 4 commander damage from Adeline. Dinky blocks a token with Eidolon and Scotty takes 1 from the token. I end the turn. Shu draws for turn and plays Gemstone Caverns. He moves straight to combat and attacks Dinky with Ledger Shredder for 3 damage, and Scotty with Tymna for 2 damage. Shu gains 2 life from Tymna. He moves to main phase 2, and Tymna triggers, losing 2 and drawing 2 cards. He then casts Thrasios, taking 1 from Mana Confluence, and ends his turn. Dinky untaps and wins his Crypt trigger on upkeep. He draws for turn and plays an Underground Sea. He casts a Talisman of Hierarchy, taking 1 from City of Ass, and passes the turn. Scotty untaps, draws, and passes the turn. I untap, draw, and play a War Room. I move to combat and attack Shu with Adeline. Adeline triggers. Shu blocks a token with Thrasios and takes 5 from Adeline. Dinky blocks a token with Eidolon, and Scotty takes 1 from a token. I move to second main phase and cast Vryn Wingmare. I end the turn. Shu untaps and draws for turn. He plays Averting Catacombs, moves to combat and attacks Dinky with Ledger Shredder for 3 and attacks Scotty with Tymna for 2 and gaining 2. He moves to second main and Tymna triggers, losing 2 life and drawing 2 cards. He then casts Biomancer's Familiar, taking 1 from Mana Confluence and passing the turn. Dinky untaps and wins his Crypt trigger on upkeep. He draws for turn and plays a Vault of Champion. He casts Sefris, taking 1 from City of Ass, and ends the turn. Scotty untaps and draws for turn. He casts Tymna. Shu holds priority and cracks his Verdant Catacombs, taking 1, searches for Savannah and puts it onto the battlefield. Tymna resolves and Scotty passes the turn. I untap and draw. I play a Rogue's Passage, a CEDH staple. I then cast Elite Spellbinder. Dinky holds priority and casts Vampiric Tutor. Shu responds to that, casting Swift Reconfiguration, targeting Adeline. Reconfiguration resolves, turning Adeline into a Ford F-150. Dinky searches for a card and puts it on top, losing 2 life. Elite resolves and ETB triggers, targeting Shu. I look at his hand and see Dispel, Pact of Negation, Mental Misstep, Thassa's Oracle, Opposition Agent, Grand Abolisher, and Misty Rainforest. I exile Thassa's Oracle, which he can cast from exile with an extra 2-mana tax. I move to combat and crew Adeline with 2 human tokens and Elite Spellbinder. I attack Scotty with Vryn and Shu with Adeline. Adeline triggers, Shu blocks the token with Thrasios and takes 8 from Adeline. Dinky blocks a token with Eidolon. Scotty blocks a token with Tymna, gaining 2 and losing 2 from Vryn. I pass the turn. Shu untaps, draws for turn, and consults with Dinky and Scotty if any of them have any answers for Adeline, as they will all lose to her in the next 2 turns. They state they have nothing at the moment. Shu sighs, plays a Misty Rainforest, and ends his turn. Dinky untaps, wins his Crypt trigger, and draws for turn. Dinky casts Windfall. Shu responds with an Opposition Agent and holds priority, cracking Misty, taking 1 and putting an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Windfall resolves. Shu discards Neoform, Dispel, Pact of Negation, Mental Misstep, and Grand Abolisher. Dinky discards no cards since he's Hellbent. Scotty discards Wheel of Fortune, Intuition, Mox Opal, Chain of Vapor, and Demonic Consultation. I discard Enlightened Tutor, Guardian of Faith, and Search for Glory. We all draw 5 cards. Dinky plays Verdant Catacombs and passes the turn. Scotty untaps and draws. Scotty asks Shu if he would cast Imperial Seal, would he search for and get his Deluge to wipe the board. Shu states he would search for it, but would only cast it where X equals 1. Scotty, understandably, doesn't agree. Scotty then casts J-Lo and ends his turn. I untap and draw. I play a Plains and move to combat. I crew Adeline with 2 tokens and Spellbinder. I then activate Rogue's Passage targeting Adeline. Shu casts Swords to Plowshares targeting Adeline, taking 1 from Mana Confluence. Adeline is exiled and I gain 5 life. I then attack Scotty with Rin, dealing 2 damage. I pass the turn. Shu untaps and draws. He plays Underground Stadium. He moves to combat and attacks me with Tymna, dealing 2 and gaining 2. Ledger Shredder at Dinky, dealing 3, and moves to second main phase, triggering Tymna, losing 2 and drawing 2. He then casts Witchclaw Talisman and ends his turn. Dinky untaps and finally loses his Crypt Trigger, taking 3 damage. He draws for turn, plays an Aerated Mesa, and casts Sanctum Prelate, taking 1 from Talisman, and chooses 2 for Sanctum. He passes the turn. Scotty untaps, draws, and plays City of Traders. He cracks his Lotus Petal for blue to help cast Kraum. He moves to combat and attacks Shu, dealing 4 damage. Main phase 2, Tymna triggers, losing 1 and drawing a card. He ends the turn. I untap, draw, and play a Plains. I move to combat and attack Shu with Rin and Spellbinder, dealing 5 damage. I move to second main and cast Thalia, Garden of Thraben. I pass the turn. At my end step, Shu activates Thrasios, revealing Seedborn Muse, putting it into his hand. Shu untaps for his turn, draws, and plays a Wooded Foothills. He looks at all my thorns, rees in frustration, and casts Seedborn Muse. He cracks Wooded Foothills, taking 1, and puts a tropical island onto the battlefield. He moves to combat and attacks Scotty with Tymna, dealing 2 and gaining 2. He moves to second main and disregards his Tymna trigger. He activates Thrasios, scries 1 to the top, revealing Abrupt Decay, putting it into his hand. He passes a turn. Shu untaps with Dinky. Dinky loses his Crypt Trigger, taking 3, and draws for turn. He looks at all my thorns and passes a turn. At Dinky's end step, Shu activates Thrasios, scrying 1 to the top, revealing Command Tower, putting it onto the battlefield tapped. He activates Thrasios again, scrying 1 to the top, revealing Spellseeker, putting it into his hand. He activates Thrasios again, scrying 1 to the top, and revealing Ranger Captain of Eos, putting it into his hand. The turn moves to Scotty. Shu untaps with Scotty. Scotty draws for turn and moves to combat. He attacks me with Kraum, dealing 4 damage, moves to second main, Tymna triggers, and loses 1, draws 1, and moves to end step. Shu holds priority at end step and activates Thrasios, scrying 1 to the top, revealing Sylvan Library, putting it into his hand. He then activates again, scrying 1 to the bottom, and revealing a Devoted Druid, putting it into his hand. He activates Thrasios, scrying 1 to the top, revealing Overgrown Tomb, putting it into play tapped. He activates Thrasios again, scrying 1 to the bottom, revealing Gaia's Cradle, putting it onto the battlefield tapped. Once priority passes back to me, I activate War Room, taking 1 damage and drawing a card. The turn goes to me. Shu untaps with me. I draw a card and play a Snow-Covered Plains. I then cast Linvala, Keeper of Silence. Shu holds priority and casts Mystical Tutor. Dinky responds and casts an Aven Mind Sensor, which resolves. Mystical Tutor resolves, and Shu looks at the top 4 cards and reveals Tainted Pact. He shuffles and puts it on top. With Linvala still on the stack, Shu activates Thrasios 6 times. First one, he scries to the top, revealing a Tainted Pact and putting it into his hand. Second activation, scries to the bottom, revealing Finale of Devastation, putting it into his hand. Third activation, he scries to the top, revealing Demonic Consultation, putting it into his hand. Fourth activation, he scries to the top, revealing Swansong, putting it into his hand. Fifth activation, he scries to the top, revealing Waterlogged Grove, putting it onto the battlefield tapped. On the final activation, he scries to the bottom and reveals Vampiric Tutor, putting it into his hand. I move to combat and attack Scotty with Rin, Spellbinder, and Thalia, dealing 7. I end the turn. Shu untaps, draws for turn, and activates Witchclaw Talisman. He gives the talisman to me and searches the top 4 cards. He puts a card into his hand and shuffles. He moves to combat and attacks Dinky with Ledger Shredder, dealing 3, and Tymna, Thrasios, Opposition Agent, and Biomancer's Familiar at Scotty, dealing 8 and gaining 2 life. Shu goes to the second main and Tymna triggers losing 2 and drawing 2. He looks at his hand, the Adeline Rhetoric, and my 3 thorns, and passes the turn. The game then ends in a draw as we ran out of time. Yes, the game did come to an unfortunate outcome, but that is the nature of timed events, especially ones with a very short time limit. Regardless, I had a great time piloting Adeline, and the thorn effects impacted the game as much as I was hoping they would. In the description you'll find my deck list, which was inspired from Mind Muscle Magic's deck list, except mine is running just about every thorn effect and more creatures. Come back tomorrow to see Game 2 of my Chaos 5 games.